pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1834 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. On this podcast, we're going to have another outstanding Vietnam veteran contributing the memories of his year in Vietnam. John Shoemaker has appeared on this podcast in 12 previous episodes. He has provided us with a dramatic and close-up personal viewpoint of what it was like to serve as a combat infantry platoon leader in Vietnam. He served in B Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st Infantry, 196th Infantry Brigade in the Americal Division. He worked out of Firebase Hawk Hill up in I Corps in the northern regions of South Vietnam. In this episode, he's going to be telling us about the latter part of his tour over there when he was transferred from being a combat platoon leader out in the field back to the base camp where they made him the headquarters company commander. Due to the fact Hawk Hill was such a large installation with more than just his battalion headquarters, they also had artillery units there, aviation assets, and others. They called him the headquarters commandant because he had the responsibility for maintaining the whole post, which was a very heavy load that John carried very competently. He described his responsibilities there at the base camp. He also talked about a very memorable event that occurred when he escorted some of his troops up to Da Nang to the Bob Hope Show. He describes what it meant to him and the men to go up there. And then he gets to the part that every Vietnam veteran looked forward to. That was the D-Roast date, the date you went home. He described in detail the feelings every Vietnam veteran shared when they finally made it to the airport, wherever. Could have been in Da Nang, Cam Ranh Bay, Bien Hoa, wherever. You got on that airplane, it taxied out to the runway, that pilot poured the coal to it, and it rolled down, and as it lifted up off the ground and you knew you had safely departed Vietnam, the feelings of joy and happiness and relief were almost too much to describe. John's description fits in quite well with those feelings. This episode is where he ends his story of his time in Vietnam. Then he's coming on one more time to talk about lessons learned. And that will be a must-hear episode, so don't miss it. Without any further ado, John, come on in here. You've got the microphone. Tell us all about your time at Hawk Hill over there in Vietnam.
Okay, well, thanks, Mac, again, as this continuing series of podcasts about my time as a platoon leader. And for this particular podcast, I'm going to focus on my time when I came out of the field after over 6 months of chasing the Viet Cong and the NBA in I Corps, the northern sector of South Vietnam, for the 2nd Battalion, 1st Infantry of the 196th Infantry Brigade in the Americal Division. I know that's a mouthful. But in any event, we operated out of Chu Lai, and there was a major fire base, a forward fire base called Hawk Hill. And from there, I was out in the field supporting Bravo Company for the first 6 months of my time in Vietnam, where I saw quite a bit of small unit action, contact with the enemy, and that went on day after day for months. It was an incredible time. And I have covered a lot of that in the prior podcasts. In this particular one, I wanted to talk more about the time I was promoted as a first lieutenant to come back to Hawk Hill, a fire base that included not only the battalion headquarters, but a couple of artillery batteries, and it was a launching pad for helicopters of all types, Hueys, Slicks, Cobras, Chinooks, you name it. And we supported operations in that whole area north and west of Chulai. So I was promoted. I was taken from LZ Judy, where there was a disaster weeks before, and I became the headquarters company commander and also in charge of the headquarters itself. So the official title is headquarters and headquarters company commandant on the fire base, which housed over a couple thousand soldiers in different units. So it was a big, sprawling fire base. And part of my responsibilities included protecting the bunker line. And the bunker line for a fire base like that had been established for a few years involved multiple rows of concertina wire, a razor-sharp wire that was staked out in multiple rows, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows deep. And then in between, you'd have flares, you'd have trip wires, and then you'd have claymore mines that could be tripped from a clacker in the bunkers that line the bunker line every so many feet. And these were not just a foxhole. These were fortifications, and literally multi-story fortifications with 3 or 4 levels of sandbags and gun ports. One of the interesting things I had to do was not only check the integrity of the bunker line, making sure that the enemy hasn't cut the wire and isn't making night raids on the bunker line to create a weak point where they could then attack. Every so often, we also had these 50-gallon drums of what they called food gas. I think it's spelled Fougasse. That's a French term, food gas, which is basically it's a gasoline mixed with other ingredients to make it sticky, kind of like napalm, with an explosive charge that when under attack, if they get through the first few rows of concertina, then you can blow the food gas. And I just explain this to you, but I'm sitting in a bunker, and as the company commander, I had to light up one of these food gas drums because after 6 months, they become old and less stable, so you have to blow them in place. Well, I blew this one particular food gas, and it is shocking. An entire wall of flame just completely blinded me, and I immediately ducked thinking I was caught up in the flame. It was so powerful. It was beyond your imagination. And I was only about maybe 50 yards from where this 50-gallon drum was exploded, and it was just remarkable. Anyways, we would have these every so many yards all around this mile or two perimeter. It was long. In any event, the bunkers were pretty big as well. They could sleep anywhere from 10 to 20 or even 30 soldiers if you crowded them in with, again, roofs that would have at least 3, 4, 5 layers of sandbags. And the BTOC was really fortified. That's the Battalion Tactical Operations Center. In any event, this is where I spent at least 5 months sleeping and working daily and nightly. Not only the bunker line, but ensuring the logistical support of the companies operating for the battalion. And we had 5 different companies, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo, plus support elements and all of the officers of the battalion. What that also meant, unfortunately, was that I had to search for contraband. And yes, it's true that some of the soldiers had a difficult time, and one day I was able to find hidden a bag of marijuana that, it was basically a laundry bag that you would find your shirt in that was stuffed full of marijuana. It had to be, several pounds for sure. And this is the problem. It staggered me that soldiers in Vietnam in a combat zone where we would take a rocket now and then, and every day and every night there would be firing from the howitzers in support of the field units under attack, that we would have soldiers who would take the risk of smoking weed in a bunker at night. It just is beyond me. Or at night, sneak outside the perimeter through the gates and go into the village so that they could hook up with a girlfriend. I mean, it's just amazing to me what some people will do and what risks they will take for completely crazy reasons. So beyond that, I went from the dust and dirt and heat of spring and summer and even fall, but then the monsoons would come. And as I mentioned in another podcast, that we had to experience 2 typhoons and water everywhere, and it just flooded everything, and trying to sleep with water above and below you. And the rats, dealing with the rats was, another one of these unfortunate experiences. I didn't run into a rat when I was sleeping in the jungles, but I sure as heck had rats. I'd set up rat traps underneath my bunk bed, and I'd have to collect 4 or 5 of them filled. One trap had 3 rats that got caught by the same trap. I mean, it is just amazing where these rats come from. One of the highlights was Bob Hope. I mean, talk about somebody who would bring hope to the infantry and to the military. I remember as a child and all through my high school and college years, every Christmas, it was a major event to watch the Bob Hope show, whether he was in Korea, Germany, in all these crazy places around the world. And here I am now. I got orders to take elements of the company to see the Bob Hope show in Da Nang. I mean, how amazing is this? The whole concept of it is really beyond me. But in any event, we did get organized, but I also got orders that none of the soldiers could take weapons with them. So it's like, are you kidding me? We're going to be on Deuce and a Half, traveling up Highway 1 with about 100 men, and they're not going to have weapons. Well, fortunately, we were escorted by MPs, and the MPs, they had their act together. Some of the lead vehicles even had 30 caliber machine guns mounted on vehicles that looked like they could go into the water. They had big rubber tires, and they had a turret with these machine guns. So I'm still worried about, an ambush. If there was ever a time to ambush, 100 men without weapons going from Hawk Hill up to Da Nang. While we never made the city of Da Nang, we never got inside the urban area of Da Nang, we went to this place where it was a big open field and with a slight hill, and then they put some benches, but most, I'd say about 2,000, maybe 3,000 soldiers packed into this viewing area. And sure enough, here comes Bob Hope with his entire troupe of performers. And it was, it was a great time to be able to disconnect completely from where we were, from what we're enduring, from the war, from loss, and all of that, and just chill out and enjoy a few moments with Bob Hope and his entertainers. It's just one of those benchmarks in life that you never forget. Even so, I was worried the whole time that, we're going to get attacked. I couldn't get it out of my mind. I will admit they never did, and we got back safely. When we got back, I then started to prepare things for my replacement. When I took over, I was the first lieutenant, and I had replaced the West Point captain because this was considered a plum job. And while I appreciated the role to some degree, the experience, in many ways I did not feel safe, but I worked it. And then one day a captain came in and said, well, you're going back. Here's the paperwork. All you have to do is sign here, and we're going to make you a captain. And I said, well, thanks very much, but no, I'm not interested. I'm not a career soldier. If anything, I'm a citizen soldier who wanted to come and do his part, but I don't need to make it a career, and I don't need to be captain. He couldn't believe that I would turn it down. But the problem is, of course, by accepting it, I would go home for 6 months, and then I'd have to come back and do another tour. And I said, for what? I've done all I need to do here. And it seemed like in February 1971 that the war was going to come to an end anyway. So I said no, and a helicopter came and picked me up at Hawk Hill. And the pilots knew that I was going to Da Nang to catch a flight home, back to the world, they called it at the time. Everybody referred to it as back in the world. Well, these pilots gave me the ride that scared the death out of me. I mean, we would go along just 50 feet above the rice paddies, and we'd be going at maximum speed that a Huey can do. I don't know, 120, 30 miles an hour, which is the maximum speed, but it felt like it was going 1,000 miles an hour with the whop, whop, whop of the blades and everything shaking. And, you know, it was like I thought it was going to fall apart in midair. And then as we're coming to the wood line, he just does one of these vertical climbs, and it's like, oh, my God, we're going to die. But after they shook me up and everything, and then, of course, they had a good laugh, I got up that Huey and soon was bound for the U.S. But I tell you, even when we get on the civilian airliner, unmarked, to fly out on our trek back to the world, we did not calm down until that pilot said, "We have just left South Vietnam's airspace." Big chair went up, and there was celebrations in the plane. And then about 15 minutes later, it was complete silence as everybody fell asleep. And so ended another year in a chapter of my life that I will never forget. Mac?
What a story, what a story. John, that was a tremendous rendition of the second half of your tour over there in Vietnam. I really, really do appreciate all these stories you have told in the previous 12 episodes. It has really given everyone who listened to it a very realistic picture of how things were over there in Vietnam. Again, I encourage everyone to listen to your podcast episode where you're going to talk about lessons learned. It's something we all need to hear. Also, you may be surprised to hear that you will more than likely make another appearance on this podcast prior to your lessons learned discussion. I encourage all our listeners to be ready for it. Again, John, thank you so much for coming on here to tell us your stories. We appreciate it greatly. You have provided a tremendous addition to this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1834 of the Vietnam Veteran News. Thank you so much for coming to listen, and you are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more of these programs that will be coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?